Farum Azula is an island in the sky, and it's unique in its ability to float. In Latin, the word farum means lighthouse, and the word azula means blue. Why would an island in the sky need a lighthouse if no ships will ever reach it? If it was actually a lighthouse, it makes sense for it to be by the coast. I think this floating island used to be on the ground, and I think it was attached to the side of a mountain. You can see that some of the buildings are carved into a mountain. According to Millennia's Great Rune before it's empowered, the isolated Divine Tower stands beyond the lost Great Bridge. I can understand for a bridge to be destroyed, but for it to get lost is very interesting. When you step outside the Divine Tower, you can see that the ground was carved out cleanly. There are no signs of destruction, like the bridge was magically lifted and teleported away. The only place I've found the name Great Bridge is in Farum Azula, in the site of grace called Beside the Great Bridge. The bridge here is very wide and looks similar to the road in Lanedale. There is also a tree sentinel here. If the bridge was truly lost, it could make sense that they were talking about this one, since it was literally lifted away. I wanted to see what Farum Azula could have looked like before it was destroyed, so I pieced together the map to the best of my ability, and to my surprise, the Great Bridge doesn't seem to be attached to anything on the island. It's similar to a section on a roof, but the pattern is different. If this is the lost Great Bridge the rune was talking about, then Malekith's boss room was attached to Millennia's Divine Tower, and possibly also to Mikola's. His rune might have also been powered there since they're twins. I came up with this shape for the island, and it fits really well in some areas. I think the island could have been on the side of the Forbidden Lands. If this is true, this would make the war with the dragons seem much more serious than we could have thought. If Farum Azula was right next to Lanedale, the capital was in grave danger, and that could be why the tree sentinels chose to become part dragon. They were desperate to defend Lanedale because no walls could defend against the dragons. In the Forbidden Lands, you find a Blackblade kindred and Vulgar militiamen who patrol the area. We know these guys worked with Malekith since we see them outside the Bestial Sanctum, and the militiamen have his Beast Claw ability. They also enchant their weapons with what looks like destined death. They have a black and red fire that the weapon doesn't have on its own. The Vulgar militia are said to cut the bodies of soldiers to feed on. They were also stewards of rancid, scorched battlefields that none dare approach, and forbidden domains better forgotten by the rest of the world. Their armor set describes a scenario that seems familiar. Freshly singed battlegrounds effusing with the stench of the dead. Forbidden lands that will be excised from the memory of history. This is where the Vulgar militia serve, as untiring, unsung watchkeepers. I think the Vulgar militia was in charge of cleaning up the mess of war, and they ate the bodies like scavengers. Something we also see in the Forbidden Lands are red lights that move around like some type of aura. Their movement seems random, but they don't leave the Forbidden Lands. You also find several crimson and cerulean scarabs. The crimson tear scarab headpiece says, "The red scarabs roll clumps of crimson tears during their labors." I think there are many in the area because the red aura is a vast amount of crimson tears collecting. Why is this red aura collecting in a place full of death? These red tears could represent the suffering of the people sacrificed to grow the Erdtree, or it could be something much darker. In the game, we don't hear about the Erdtree in a negative way. We always hear about it being called holy and pure and sacred. From the DLC trailer, we can see the true terror of Marika that Gideon could have been talking about. Maybe these aren't tears. Maybe this is blood. If the Tarnished are the only ones who can use these potions, since they're supposed to become Elden Lord, maybe they're drinking the blood of the Tarnished who were sacrificed. The player character is basically a zombie, so he could be drinking zombie blood for all we know. We see Mesmer attacking these lions in the trailer. They could be beasts related to Siraj. According to the Beast Claw Greathammer, Siraj was known as the Lord of Beasts. The bottom piece of the shaft has a sculpture of what looks like a wolf. These lion beasts could have been related to the beastmen of Farum Azula, and the city that Mesmer destroyed could have belonged to primordial beings like lion guardians and misbegottens. There were also people who seemed to be communing with these beasts the same way you can with dragons. Mesmer could have begun the segregation of the creatures we see now. The spell Borealis' Mist says the dragons were lords of the mountaintops until they were defeated by the fire giants and chased from the peak. The fact that it says chased from the peak makes it seem like they could have stayed near the area, but not in the peaks. That could have been the Forbidden Lands. They stayed away from the peaks but were still close to the mountains that were their home. The beastmen create shields from earthenware, but why make them out of clay? Iron Fist Alexander was extremely resilient against fire damage, so much that he swims in lava and he helps to kill the fire giants and survive. Maybe the beastmen fought alongside the dragons, and that's why they made these fire-resistant shields. Or maybe they did it in case the giants invaded. Or could it have been to survive Mesmer's flame? The shield description calls the practice strange, like the reason for this was lost. It feels like anything related to Mesmer and that war were lost to history entirely. It could also be possible that the dragons fled to Caelid instead of the Forbidden Lands. The map fits there as well, but the isolated Divine Tower's entrance points north, towards the Forbidden Lands. There could be several reasons why Farum Azula was made to float. It could have happened when Destined Death was taken from Malekith, and he decided to embed it to himself, but also take the island with him so that no one could reach him. It could have also been raised to survive Mesmer's attack, or maybe even for the dragons to survive the Scarlet Rot of Caelid. It could also just be a form of Wandering Mausoleum, but for dragons. The only thing I know for sure is that Farum Azula is considered to be doomed. We see that the city Mesmer attacked is crumbling, but we also know that a meteor hit a ruin in the sky and made it crumble. Ruin fragments say they once belonged to a temple in the sky. You find them in the southern parts of the lands between, like Limgrave, Liurnia, and the Weeping Peninsula. However, I don't think you can find them in Farum Azula. Maybe there was a temple floating in the sky that we don't know about. Farum Azula is said to have been a giant mausoleum enshrining an ancient dragon and guarded by beastmen. If this was only a mausoleum, their actual home should have been nearby. I believe that home was destroyed, and they could have been relocated to Caelid.
This is reptilian evolution at its peak!
After looking closely at some of the architecture, I've noticed some things that might link Farum Azula to the Divine Towers and the DLC. The arena floor of the lion person has a flower shape that is repeated in many areas of Farum Azula. The design in Farum Azula is replicated at both the Grand Lift of Dectus and the Lift of Rold. The Misbegottens were treated like slaves for making contact with the Crucible, but we never knew what their work was. Maybe they built the Grand Lifts and even Leyndell. Maybe that's why Miquella takes care of them and why they know about the Haligtree. They probably built the structures we see in the Haligtree. The lion person in the DLC trailer is using lightning magic like the dragons. This leads me to believe that the ancient creatures of the lands between were working together. In the floor of Placidus's arena, you find some details that are also repeated around Farum Azula, but here they look brand new. Since Placi turned back time and fixed the arena, we can see what it looked like when it was in its prime. The worm-like creatures here look like worm faces, but even more like the worm creatures from the trailer. Other shapes surrounding it look like some type of evolution might be happening. At the end, you see a dragon. There are other reliefs of dragons, but one interesting depiction I found is of a tree with two small dragons on either side. The tree looks like it's in a plant pot. I found the same design in the ruins of Limgrave. Those could be the outside walls of Placidus's arena since we see it above. I found a similar design in the Erdtree with the tree over a similar plant pot, but it's inverted. The plant pot is upside down, or it could just be the roots. And instead of having a dragon on either side, it's two griffins. There is a creature in the walls of every divine tower that looks like some type of dragon fetus. It looks like you can see the legs and where the wings should be, but it doesn't have any wings. You can clearly see a spine. The feet on this creature looks just like the ones in Farum Azula. If the divine towers are sacred, this could be a depiction of the Elden Beast. The dragons had an Elden Lord after all. The divine tower in Liurnia has S-shaped designs that also match the relief. I'll be looking out for what happened in Farum Azula as well as the Mausoleum Demigods in the DLC, so stick around to find out more.